The European Union is one step closer to finalising a €150 billion loan package titled SAFE. The aim of this pool of cash is to help member states ramp up their military capabilities while also supporting Ukraine on the front lines. My name is Angela Scoogens, this is TVP World, and I'm joined by Martin Joesaar. That's the Programme Officer at the EU Defence Innovation Office in Kyiv. Hi, Martin.
Hello.
This €150 billion loan package, SAFE, the aim there is to also help Ukraine on the battlefield as it may receive some of these military capabilities that are being produced. How could it help Ukraine there?
Thank you very much for the question. Indeed, this money hopefully reaches Ukraine or a lot of it. The struggle, of course, is that this money is for the EU countries. So the countries will take the loan, the member states, meaning that it's up to them to decide what exactly will they do with this finance instrument. Of course, we hope that many of them will decide to procure from Ukraine, and actually some of that equipment and everything that they are buying will actually stay in Ukraine. So that in this way, it can be a direct support for Ukraine.
Well, I mean, what we've been hearing often is the EU Defence Commissioner, Andris Kubilius, talking about how Ukraine should be a lesson for the EU, particularly stating that Kyiv really slashed red tape when it came to permitting to scale up defence innovation. Kyiv is kind of a hotspot for defence innovation here. What projects do you think that those member states would go to Ukraine to help co-procure?
That's of course a very complex question because it depends on the member state. EU is a very big variety of different needs and different challenges that we have. And of course the goal would be to support Ukraine, but at the same time support ourselves, because also Ukraine needs a strong Europe, but we need a much stronger Europe than we have right now. And in reality, of course, anything unmanned, everything unmanned, drones, underwater drones, maritime systems, ground systems, all of that is super important for us. Why? Because especially the last 2 years, it has significantly changed how the war is fought. On the battlefield, everything is controlled by the unmanned systems. Now there's more than 80% of the actual battlefield damage is done by unmanned systems, which is remarkable. This is something that we have never seen before. So we don't want to just to buy this equipment for Ukraine, but actually we need to learn from it at the same time. We can do some of the production, for example, on the EU side. We can do some combinations of procurements. So a lot of that is super important for us. And of course, you can include electronic warfare in there, all kinds of air defense systems. So it's a big mix of combination of systems, and really we hope that this financing instrument will ramp up also developments, production, all kinds of cooperation with Ukraine.
You mentioned how warfare is changing. Is Russia learning from how this warfare is changing, and particularly the innovation that's going on in Ukraine?
Unfortunately, for sure. So the challenge for Ukrainians is always how to catch up with Russia, and so which side is actually kind of leading at that moment. So it's pretty much both of them are trying to innovate all the time, and both of them are learning very quickly. And this has been a huge challenge, especially for the drones. This seems to be the most popular topic usually that we talk about, and of course it has to be one of the most important topics. But the speed how Russia manages to innovate and change their system, it has led to the point that actually Ukrainians oftentimes after every 2 to 6 weeks have to fully change their systems. And this is why something that we have to learn also, how to do not only the big and very complex systems and very kind of strong cycles of innovation. We're talking often 2 to 3 years if you want to develop something else or something new. But we also need to learn on the EU side that how we can adapt our technologies, how we can adapt our technology capability in months. And this is something we need to learn. We need to actually innovate our systems.
I mean, is the EU ready to think that far ahead, to think 2 steps in advance, like Ukraine?
I think we are ready. We are definitely learning from what is happening. And oftentimes people say that, hey, we are too slow. Yes, we understand we are too slow, but we are actually working very hardly, very heavily to figure out the ways how we can go faster, how we can go on a bigger scale. If we talk about innovation, EU is a complex system. It's a lot of regulations, a lot of bureaucracy. We need to make sure that we use our funding in a very transparent way without any issues pretty much on the financial side or regulation side, and all the member states have to be also happy with this, more or less. So it's not an easy task, but definitely the discussions we are having and the steps we are taking, we are moving in the right direction. The only question is, are we fast enough in the changes?
And going back to SAFE and that pool of cash, how do you think Poland could tap into that? What projects do you think are particularly weak there, and they could look to the EU Defence Innovation Office in Kyiv and say, hey, we potentially want some of these military capabilities?
The needs of individual countries, we haven't received them yet. So how the process works is that as soon as SAFE is fully announced, fully adopted, countries will have 2 months to give us their intentions. So they need to make the list of projects, programs, initiatives they want to start with this funding, and of course to tell us also what amounts are they looking for. And at the same time, we are talking very often and very kind of intensely with Ukrainian counterparts, that what they are willing to offer. Are they willing to offer or open up their export a little bit more? Are they actually willing to kind of let us buy from them more? Because for the last 3 years it has been very limited, of course for the understandable reasons. But each individual country, what they will buy in the end, it's a little bit too early to say yet.
It's interesting that you raised that. Is there even scope for a member state to go to Ukraine to say, hey, we want to buy this? I mean, can they afford to sell this, or would it really impact their war efforts?
They can, for sure. So especially if we look at the last year, their production capability was much, much higher than they actually produced, meaning that they have a workforce available, they have the capability available to produce more. Of course, EU doesn't want to take that equipment away from the battlefield. Ukraine needs it first, but what we're talking about now is some kind of combination of procurement. So, for example, if some country buys, let's say, 100,000 drones from Ukraine, so let's say 90% of that, the first 90,000, will actually stay in Ukraine and support Ukrainian battlefield needs. But the last 10,000 can end up at some point also at this EU country who chooses to buy it. And why this is important is actually on the EU side, we need also that technology. We need to learn from it. We need to understand how to use it. And actually I have a very good example from Estonia. The military exercise Hedgehog, it just ended last week, and the drones were very, very actively used in there. And they were used together with Ukrainians. The Ukrainian instructors were there to teach them and to explain the tactics, and many Western units were very surprised. Still, of course, we have seen it in the videos and the reports from the battlefield, but you need to feel it yourself, that if a FPV drone or any other system hits your armored vehicle or your tank, even if you're in that tank, it's a completely different feeling. And we need to get this feeling into the Western military leaders, because we need to adapt and we need to do it fast.
Maybe they should go to the NATO military exercises, get the fear of God in them. For sure, and not only the fear, but we still tend to think that we are somehow fighting completely differently. But this is the war of the current day, so we actually need to understand how they do it, and we need to adapt. If the NATO military alliance funding target is scaled up at The Hague next month, do you see member states of the EU potentially being more interested in those military capabilities in Ukraine? Do you see potentially a correlation between those two things happening? For sure, like the more money member states have available for their own defense capability ramp up, the more they will be looking of what is actually ongoing. And as soon as we are buying things or producing or making the production facilities in mass
then it's still very important. Of course, we can do more, but it's very important to do the right things. So of course, they're very, very carefully looking in the details of what is worth building, buying, procuring right now. And I think this activity and I will be seeing more and more delegations on the Ukrainian side, and which is always good. And these discussions are important. And as I see, countries are actually very actively doing it already.
The EU Defence Innovation Office in Kyiv has been operating for roughly 9 months. What lessons have you learned during this time? You spoke earlier about drones and innovation, but what else?
We already covered a little bit the speed of innovation, the adaptability, or the kind of willingness to even to think in weeks, not in months or years. And this is something that I see in Kyiv very much on daily basis. Of course, the events like hackathons, boot camps, they bring it out more because they manage to bring together the key stakeholders, meaning the innovators, the people who are actually, they know what to build and how to build. Also the end user, the military, kind of the military experts, forces from the ground, from the trenches, pretty much literally they come to support these events because they need that new technology. And these kind of communities, of course, we have seen them on the EU side also. The hackathons, it's nothing new, but the scale of what they're doing, and very importantly also, it has to be supported with a very flexible financing instruments. And Ukraine has managed to do it. So it's something that we need to learn, that we need to add more flexibility in our systems. And for this, a lot can be done by the member states, because every member state, or most of them at least, in their Ministry of Defense have an innovation unit. And those local funding possibilities are usually most flexible. Of course, from the EU side, we are also working on instruments of how to speed it up from our side. But we see the need of this more and more, and the results Ukrainians have managed to show, they are really remarkable.
And what restrictions are particularly cumbersome? This is what we've heard from many officials, but I'm trying to understand what red tape in particular needs to be gutted to ensure that this scale-up can happen.
The struggle we have, or the challenge we have, is that we need to make sure there is no corruption, that the money is actually used in a correct way. And of course, we are used to creating all of these checkups, all of these systems to guarantee that this is how it goes. So, and I'm not saying that we should open up this completely, but the goal is to add flexibility in there, because every day, every week is adding actually delays in when this can be kind of reaching the battlefield. So in Ukraine, they really, as I said, they think in days or weeks. So it's really like, if this technology doesn't end up in the battlefield next week, then we should actually focus on something else. And now, how to kind of, it's hard to say that this one thing that we need to change. We need to change the mentality. Yes, that's actually the concept. But often this mentality is because our systems are so complex, and they are in this way for a reason. And we are used to this the kind of systems, but how to quickly adapt them, we'll see. The main thing is that we are, especially from the individual member states, we are hearing more and more these very flexible funding mechanisms, and we have to a little bit give more trust to the companies that they are actually building what we need in the very fastest way that they can. And we need to be kind of a little bit less worried about the actual, that everything is done by the book.
Mobilising frozen Russian state assets to the tune of roughly 200 billion euros is in the news cycle again. You're at the coalface of this war in Ukraine. How could this money help the fighters on the battlefield if it was mobilised?
Any kind of finance instrument, any kind of budget that actually reaches Ukraine has a lot more buying power than anything in EU. Why? Very simply said, the motivation and kind of the work time. Ukrainians like to say that they have 400 work days in a year. So average European has maybe 200, 250. So, and where that difference comes, first of all, they don't have any weekends, they don't have any kind of national holidays, they don't care, is it 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, they work until it's needed. Why? Because they have an existential need to do it. And this means that the buying power of €1 equals, in Ukraine, equals maybe 5 or even 10 on the most of the EU side. So in any way we can use this financing instrument or that budget in combination with everything else. For example, the Danish model was a great example that actually helped to procure from Ukraine to Ukraine. So all of that speeds up not only the Ukrainian capability to defend themselves, but it actually gives us the technology that we need in the future much more faster. And we need to be able to do this kind of combinations of development programs and projects, not just to, I'm not saying that we need to give everything to Ukraine, we need to do it in combination because both of us need each other.
Yeah, and what we've heard from a lot of politicians is that Ukraine's war is actually the EU's war, but they're just on the front lines of this. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us, Martin.
Thanks so much.
And thank you so much for watching TVP World, but make sure that you stick around as more news, commentary and analysis is coming up. See you next time.